Hello and welcome. This is Matthias 76, and together we are decoding the deception. Together, we're going deep in the Word of God. And tonight we are continuing, today we are continuing our study of the book of Matthew. We're in the 22nd chapter, obviously winding down toward the end, and we've got this event going on, multifaceted, but really one event. Jesus has come to Jerusalem. He has been away from Jerusalem for a long time. He has come back to Jerusalem, and all of his enemies, all of those who oppose him, all of those who want him gone are lying in wait, and they're doing everything they can to trick him up, and they keep coming after him, and they keep losing. We can't say it too many times. Arguing with God in your own life, in my own life, arguing with God just never goes well. Trying to best him, outthink him, get your will over his will does not go well. We see that here with those who are vehemently opposed to him. They are his enemies, but we in our own lives will try to argue with God, wrestle with God, get our will accomplished in certain areas, and it just never goes well. It doesn't. So there are things for us to learn from this that apply directly to us. There's a great deal for us to learn as we see how Jesus overcomes these obstacles and what happens when those who are the wise, those who are the learned, those who are in power, those who presume themselves to be above everyone else and worthy of displacing the one who is Lord, when they tangle with him, they come out looking foolish. There's really no other term for it. And we're going to see one of the consequences of that in this first exchange that we look at today here in Matthew 22:15. We'll just read the first verse. Actually, the first two verses. Then the Pharisees went and plotted how to entangle him in his words. And they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians. We'll stop there. And I said that, I hadn't thought of this as I prepared, but I had this image in my mind. I was blessed to have a number of amazing teachers in my day, professors in my day. And in college, I had a philosophy professor. I had him for many courses, brilliant man. And I kid you not, he looked like Socrates in a frumpy old gray suit. He had this longish hair, swept back, a little goatee, back before goatees were the thing. And he would sit on the desk and rock as he taught. And one time, this freshman, it was logic, and everybody had to have a philosophy course. It was one of the courses you could have to cover a certain thing, and if it lined up with their schedule, they'd take a course like logic, okay? And there was this freshman student who was trying to argue logic with Dr. Lehman. That was his name, Big Bill Lehman, trying to argue logic with him, and he looked over at those of us who were his philosophy majors. He looked over and kind of smiled and grinned and cocked his head like, what are you going to do? And then he turned and very politely blew the kid out of the water. Now, the thing was, this kid didn't know he was blown out of the water, because one of the things you learn about logic is you can't argue logic. Logic is. Here, we have the Pharisees coming, and listen to what it says. They plotted, they went kind of like they scurried off. because you've got this engagement with all of them around. And the Pharisees went off by themselves and they plotted how to entangle him in his words. Think of that. Think of the lunacy of trying to entangle the Lord high God in his words. But they knew they didn't want to get humiliated. They knew they didn't want to get embarrassed again. So what did they do? They sent the B team. They coached their disciples, their students, the Pharisee wannabes. They coached them and sent them so they could send the question, but it wasn't coming from them, so they wouldn't be humiliated. What does that tell you about their real estimation of their odds of success? Not very high. Okay. They sent their disciples to him. This is very important, along with the Herodians. The Herodians. Now, there are these different classes of what we would categorize in a lump group as the opponents of Jesus, the Jewish opponents of Jesus. You've got the Sadducees. We'll get to who they were and what they were about soon. You've got the Sadducees. They were the priests. They were clergy. Okay. And you've got the Pharisees, who were holy men, but they were laymen technically. They weren't priests. They were just very learned, very knowledgeable, and they were wealthy. And they paid the guys called the scribes, who made the copies of the scriptures. They were also known as the lawyers, who knew the law forward and backward, inside and out. These people knew their Bible. But then we've got this group that we haven't really heard about much, and they only come up a few times in the Gospels, in all the Bible, the Herodians. The Herodians, and the name will give it away. They are Jews in positions of power. They were power players. They were the Jews who supported Herod and his affiliation with Rome. That they were the Jews who were all for, they were okay with Roman rule. And you have to understand, Herod wasn't really a Jew, but he pretended to be. All of the Herods, that applies to all of them. Herod the Great is gone by now. But Herod had connections with Rome. That's why he was in power. The original Herod the Great was a really smooth operator. These were the Herodians. They were all for that connection with Rome. Why? Because there's power. There are always those who, whichever way the wind is blowing, it's going that way. That's the way it's going to be. They're the ones in power. We'll be friends with them. And then we get to ride on their coattails and have power as well. So, very important. They were all for Rome, because being for Rome gave them power. Okay. So they sent their disciples along with the Herodians. And here's something I neglected to say. The Pharisees and the Sadducees, the scribes and the lawyers, hated the Herodians. They hated them. And the Herodians just put up with them. There was no love lost between these groups. But here, they had a common enemy. The Herodians wanted Jesus gone too. Their take on it was related to what we're going to hear from the Sadducees, that they're afraid that Rome would come and take their place away. Well, if Rome's unhappy, the Herodians were supposed to try to keep the peace with Rome. They wanted Jesus gone too. So enemies make for, common enemies make for strange bedfellows, right? They'll all jump in together and work for this cause. As soon as it's over, they're going to go back to being at each other's throats. Okay, so just a little bit of insight into day-to-day politics in first century Palestine. But they got together, the B team of the Pharisees, the Pharisee wannabes, and the Herodians. Another component to this is quite possible. The Pharisees didn't want to be seen with the Herodians, but their disciples going and doing it, that's acceptable too. Got two reasons for him not to show up. Saying, teacher, we know that you are, and listen to this, there's just butter all over this. We know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully, and you do not care about anyone's opinion, and you are not swayed by appearances. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Okay. The way they phrase it, and the words are in blue on the screen here, they're moving him all the more toward, and here's the funny thing, they're trying to manipulate him, but what they say is true. He spoke the truth. He taught the word of God truthfully, and he didn't care about who was who. It didn't matter to him. And we could cite biblical references all the way back through the Old Testament where we see that God doesn't care about station. God doesn't care about what other people think. You can go back to Samuel picking David to be king. God said, you look at appearances, I look at the heart, okay? Is it lawful for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not? No win question. You weren't allowed to say you shouldn't pay taxes to Rome. The Herodians were there so they could run directly to Herod. And who was Herod? Who was Herod? Herod was the one who'd done away with John the Baptist. If somebody's going to get rid of somebody, it'll be Herod. He's got a track record. Herod was the one who got rid of John the Baptist. Here, they were ready to go. If he said, no, you shouldn't pay taxes to Caesar. And another key point, their worldview for all of the faithful Jews, whether they be Pharisees or Sadducees, scribes, people on the street, they all had one thing in common. They hated the Romans. They hated the Romans. The Romans came in and ruled. And when Rome ruled, you didn't cross them. It was peaceful. There was prosperity. They'd let you do your own thing as long as you obeyed. Herod knew that, and that's why he got along with them. But everyone hated them except for the Herodians. The Pharisees didn't want to say that it was lawful to pay taxes, but they wouldn't say it in public. They wouldn't say, no, we shouldn't be paying taxes to Rome. That was a good way to get in a whole lot of trouble, very least get locked up. So if you say, no, we shouldn't pay taxes to Rome, the Herodians are going to be mad at you. But if you say, yes, you should pay your taxes to Rome, then you've got all of Israel upset with you, especially the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the scribes, because they loathed Rome. How are you going to win? There's nowhere to go. We've got him. And remember, these people who were trying to trick him up, we laugh at them and we see the folly of their way. It doesn't mean they were stupid. They weren't. They weren't. This was a good attack. And it's right out in public. Everyone there, is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Another key point, don't forget, their idea of freedom, their idea of salvation, their idea of a Messiah was to free them from the Romans. And you better believe that a lot of the people who were following Jesus, even his own disciples, it's just a couple days away in the text that they're going to ask him, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom to Israel? They thought it was about kicking out the Romans too. They at least thought that was an integral part of it. This is a key motif here. It's a big part of the fabric of their world and what mattered and what polarized. There are things today that polarize, right, in our society. I'm not going to mention any of them because then I'll have to go off on those tangents because I can't help myself. But Jesus, aware of their evil, it says malice, but the word is just evil. Their evil intent, which is malice, said, "Why do you put me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin for the tax." Why are they hypocrites? What is a hypocrite? A hypocrite is somebody who says one thing and does something else. They're trying to play both sides of it for their advantage. And Jesus, it's always the simple things. Brilliance is very often just in the simple solution. And they brought him a denarius. And that would be the very coin that was used to pay the tax. There's a specific tax that this question revolves around. And I'm not going to go into it because it just doesn't matter. But the coin that would have paid that, a denarius, they brought to Jesus and they gave it to him. And Jesus said to them, and he always asked questions, "Whose likeness and inscription is this?" And they said, "Caesar's." Then he said to them, "Therefore, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And when they heard it, they marveled, and they left him and went away. He blows them out of the water with his answer. What can they say? What can they say? They're talking about a tax. He said, "Bring me the coin." He brought him the coin. And in that day, it was the actual Caesar of that day. I'm trying to think of which one it would have been. Drawing a blank. You'd think I'd know. Sometimes I forget things. His face is on the coin, stamped on the coin in his name. Things of the world, pay to the world. And to God, the things that are God's. What's God's? What belongs to him? Obedience, worship, submission, acceptance of his rule and his reign. And what were if you go back and listen to the video that preceded this one and the one that preceded that, what are all those parables about? Them refusing to accept the king, to accept the son as the rightful heir and ruler. So he takes their attack, their cleverly thought out attack, and he turns it right back to the point that he's making. He takes their words and just gracefully turns it back to the point he's been making repeatedly. And over here on the right, it's not, let's see if we can get this to look bigger. It's always nice to have an actual picture. Oh, is it going to get bigger for us? I can't get it to look bigger, but that's what the coins looked like back then. They literally were minted. They were stamped. They put a slug of metal down on a mold, and it had an impression on that mold on the one side. And then they put another one over it and whacked it on the top. The coins were much rougher looking than ours are, but they were at least made of precious metal, which ours are not. Okay, we're just going to talk about this with the Sadducees because I don't have time. This is a challenge because this is a great, big, long parable. We're just going to talk about this with the Sadducees to start with. The same day, the Sadducees came to him who say that there is no resurrection. And they asked him a question. It's really easy to understand, and those of you who've been listening to me for years, you know what's coming. It's easy to remember who the Sadducees are. The Sadducees don't believe in the resurrection, and that's why they're sad. You see? Hokey, yes, but I've remembered that for about 36 years now. It makes it simple to remember one of the key things about the Sadducees. They didn't believe in the resurrection. Try to get your mind around that. And they were the high priests, and they didn't believe that there was life after death. You can see why they would very much oppose Jesus, and why, when he did rise after he'd been put to death, it must have really done a number on them. Oh, we'll try to get it done. Why not? The same day, the Sadducees came to him, who say that there is no resurrection. And they asked him a question, saying, "Teacher, Moses said if a man dies, having no children, his brother must marry the widow and raise up offspring for his brother." There was a reason for that. Everything was about the son, the eldest son. If a father died, he was married, and he didn't leave behind a son, the inheritance, everything else really got to be a legal issue. Okay, so this was just part of the warp and woof of their world and how things worked. And it's straight from the Pentateuch. Now, there were 7 brothers among us, and they're just going to come up with this absurd illustration to try to trick him again. Now, there were 7 brothers among us. The first married and died, and having no offspring, left his wife to his brother. So to the second and the third, and down to the 7th. After them all, the woman died. In the resurrection, therefore, of the 7, whose wife shall she be? For they all had her. So in their minds, and they'd probably worked on this one for a while. That's the other thing with these attacks. They had waited for him to come back to Jerusalem. They figured he would. And I'm just in the realm of plausible but hypothetical. They knew he was going to have to come back to Jerusalem, because you can't be a big shot if you're not in Jerusalem. You got to come to the big city. And the ones there had probably been planning for some time how they could trip him up, this bumpkin out there teaching in the sticks, out teaching the farmers and the shepherds and those fools who will follow along. When he gets here to us, we're going to put him in his place. They thought about this stuff and came up with their best over quite some period of time. I'm not saying that's exactly the way it was, but it seems to me quite plausible. But Jesus answered them, "You are wrong." Again, you've heard me say this a lot. Nobody ever said that to them. You are wrong because you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God. That whole sentence, you don't know the scriptures. And because of that, you don't know the power of God. They knew the scriptures. As far as text, they knew it forward and backwards. The best among them, you could give them any 3 words and they could tell you where it was from in the Old Testament. And they didn't have chapters and verses to go by. They knew the word that was in the middle of the Bible. They knew the word that was in the middle of each book of the Bible. They studied it. They knew it forward and backward. They were fanatics about it. At one point, Jesus says, "You search the scriptures because in them you think you have life, but it is they who testify of me." The scriptures testify of me. You think you know them because by knowing them, you're saved, you're special, you're whatever. It's all about me. You can't know this book if you don't accept me. You don't get it. You can know it all and not believe it. We're going through Daniel, where Nebuchadnezzar says all these things about God Most High, Yahweh. He doesn't believe in him. He doesn't trust in him as his saving God, but he knows who he is. And he says he's pretty awesome. So, you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God. And that had to rock their world. For in the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like the angels in heaven. And as for the resurrection, let's just deal with that. For in the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like the angels in heaven. And every time I read this, every time I teach this, I think of the same person. I had this sweet lady in a congregation of mine who she was up in her 80s, and her husband, they were just the sweetest people, and she just adored her husband and he adored her. And she just didn't like this passage because she couldn't comprehend that her and her husband weren't going to be married in eternity. And I told her, I said, Gwen, I think the best way to think of it is whatever it is that's there, which I can only guess, I can only imagine, whatever it is so great that that's not going to matter. That's not going to matter. But you also have to understand procreation, right? Physical intimacy, which is about, in this life, procreation. That is important because we die. In heaven, we don't die, right? So it's okay to say there are things about the life that is to come that I don't comprehend. And the more I read about it in the scriptures, I understand it's so wonderful. I know that there's someone close to me that says the one thing they know about going to heaven is that when they get there, they're going to say, wow, it's way better than I thought it would be. That's just where our train of thought needs to be. And as for the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was said to you by God? I am the God, and this is kind of a key passage in the Old Testament, kind of repeated a number of times. I am the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. Boom. Why would he say that all the time? He kept saying it after Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were gone. Moses wrote that down repeatedly, that that's what God said. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. Biblical proof from the books you hold most dear that shows that there is life after death. And when the crowd heard it, they were astonished, blew them away at his teaching. It took the understanding of spiritual life and what it's about to a completely new level. And it showed the stuff that they'd been faithful to and these guys they'd listened to all their lives long because they were the leaders, that they were missing all the good stuff. And you can do that. You can do that. You can be right in the middle of something. You can be right in the middle of an amazing place and miss all the good stuff. I could have lived in Peru, as I did. I could have lived in Peru and just gone to McDonald's. There were a couple, and Kentucky Fried Chicken. There was one, and Starbucks, there was one, and just eaten there, and I would have missed all the good stuff, all the Peruvian food, all the culture, all of that stuff. So also you can be in the Word, and if your desire for being in the Word isn't getting closer to the God who loves you, who through that Word speaks to you and calls you and leads you and guides you and comforts you, if that is not your goal, then it's dry academia. And that was the problem with these people who were in leadership. And that's why they didn't get, most of them, some of them were converted. Praise God for that. But most of them did not get what he was talking about. It is about faith. It is about the heart. It is about whom you know and not what you know. I'm very concerned about what I know. I'm very concerned and obsessive and work very hard about whom I know and how I teach his word, because not because I want to be right, but because it's about him. But you can make the mistake of being so focused on being right. And I've seen churches do this, to be so focused on being right that you forget what it is and who it is you are right about. It is about the one who came to seek and save the lost. And if we lose sight of that, we'll end up like these guys. And don't be these guys. We're going to stop there when, well, I guess I didn't really go over. Managed to sneak that all in there. Awesome. Want to thank you for listening. I pray that this ministry is a blessing to you. If it is, then please smash that thumbs up button. Give us a thumbs up, smash the like button. It really does matter. Most of us watch videos and we forget to do that, but smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, and when you do, make sure and hit the notification bell so you're made aware that we've put out new content. Share this video with others, put it out on your social media feed, send it to somebody who could benefit from it. And finally, drop by and pay us a visit at our resource center. It's not a website, it's a resource center, decodingthedeception.com. If you know our name, you can find us. And up there in the top right, I think my face is over it right now, but up in the top right, there's a contact us. You can send us a Bible question. You can just reach out, give some feedback, say hello, whatever it might be. We'd love to hear from you. This is Matthias 76. Together, we've gone deep in the Word of God. God bless and have a great day.